This is going to be the town hall meeting for the 4th of February. We got a couple subjects to talk about, and hopefully we'll review some of the things from last week as well. I know that David will be joining us. David Peckham from EOS42 will be joining us. Hopefully Kadar will momentarily. Some of the things that we wanted to go while we have you on, going over the EOS stack would be a good idea. Get some current understanding of what's going on there. Conversation about removing vote decay for proxies if the proxy votes regularly. That came up as a discussion as well. I mean, proxies are coming on strong. I think that's more and more people from proxies that we can get on this call, I think is important as well. We should familiarize ourselves with more of the proxy, the people that are running the proxies, making sure that their voice is heard. Discussing next steps for a monthly quarterly vote on the savings bucket. This is something that came up last week, and I'll fill you guys in on. Was there last week to discuss it. And then the BP weekly goals and updates. Basically, thinking about some goals that we all have, each of us, in the BPs that we run. Maybe a little talking about some of those things. Let's start off, Luke, with the EOS stack. What's going on? How you guys doing?
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity. I don't want to make this like an EOS DAC commercial. I want to talk also about DACs in general. But to start off just about EOS DAC, we are a community-owned block producer. We are a DAC enabler, building open source technologies to run ourselves as a DAC and make that available to the entire EOS community. We're currently, actually right now, if you own EOS DAC tokens or you had EOS in April, we would really love for you guys to come in, go to members.eosdac.io, go ahead and register and then vote for custodians. Just like the EOS mainnet launch, we have a 15% kind of voter engagement metric that we've put in our constitution. We have to reach that number in order to launch the DAC officially. We had a discussion a week or two ago. We're kind of like, it's been a couple months now. So we're kind of thinking come February 14th or so, we may end up just launching it. We have a mechanism to do that according to the Constitution. That'll be okay. But ultimately, we'd love for actual members to come in and vote. So if you got EOS DAC tokens, please do that. But ultimately, what I'd like to talk about, especially in the light of that recent hack where $160 million just gone because there's one central person who controlled the centralized exchange, and that person died, and the storyline is that they don't have access to these funds. And so I really want more of the community to at least look at the DAC model as a mechanism for multi-signature control of smart contracts, of funds, of corporations, companies, the whole deal. And what I'm excited about, and what we've been working on with EOS DAC, is that this is available right now. I did actually, just the end of last week, I did a tutorial kind of walking through how you could take all of our smart contracts, put them over on the Jungle testnet. And I even did like an 1.5-hour video recording of me walking through it as well. So it's not easy. It takes some time. We will be improving this in the future with the DAC factory, making this, just so you can click some buttons. But ultimately, the permissions exist right now with time-delayed transactions, multi-signature permissions. That there are mechanisms that we can do to protect the community, protect funds, protect organizations, and really build more trust in the ecosystem. You mentioned your friend who, is really, there's certain things you just can't do with Bitcoin. You can't do with certain systems. Even on Ethereum, there's limitations for a DAC in terms of, like the DAO hack. Michael Yates did a great post yesterday on that, how that could be prevented with the permission systems that we have and the ability to update smart contracts after they go live. So I'm really excited about just kind of educating people to what a DAC is and why it's valuable to the whole community, and really kind of that's a large, gigantic topic, obviously, and just focusing it in on maybe the permissions and securing property, securing contracts, and making sure there's not a single point of failure. Because I think that's what a lot of us are looking for. It's why we got into this, industry, is that decentralized model of governance, this decentralized model of no single point of failure, where there's not one person who can cause all this value to go away. So yeah, I would love to just kind of have any questions as well, as far as like, what do people want to know about DACs? What do they want to know about what we've built so far? How can they maybe even participate and get involved? This is really a community effort is what we're going for. That's why we airdropped on all of the EOS holders back in April. We want everybody involved in this, because what we end up building will be hopefully what people use so they won't think like, oh, I'm going to do another startup. They'll think I'm going to do another community activity. And in that community, I'm going to create the network effect of everybody being involved, everyone being an owner, everyone being a worker, everyone being a investor, all together, and a customer of whatever the DAC is doing.
Yeah, so you know what?
As fellow entrepreneurs, I know you probably you've had that situation where you're like, hey, I want to do this one thing, but now I need 3 other companies I have to start in order to do that one thing. And this idea being, if we launch those other things as DACs, well, then you don't have to manage them. They can run on their own autonomously with the community that's passionate about them. And that's another aspect of this side.
For people that aren't aware, back in, I think it was in 2016, late 2015, the Ethereum, the DAO hack. Going back to that. Now, at the time, everyone was super excited. The conversation of decentralized autonomous organizations, decentralized autonomous communities, I mean, really is one of the future state, models that everyone at the time, really, when you hit that breakthrough first thought of what these things are. These are, one of the best enabled functionalities of a tokenized offering, or to the ability to create an organization and run it in a tokenized model. So when I heard Michael in his thoughts about running EOS Stack initially, and I was super excited. One of my first thoughts, Luke, on the BPs before we all went to go launch BP was the idea that, wow, these things, every BP should be a DAC. My first thought on that was, if we want to avoid collusion, if we want to avoid, and we want to have a stronger network, that was my original thought. So when he started working on the concept, I was really excited, and hearing that you were getting involved was really exciting as well. So, ideally creating better tools in what you guys are doing out there for others to enable and create DACs. I mean, it's super important. One of the things that we talked about last week was, we talked about the community involvement and getting votes and making sure that it's going to be possible, to ideally enable functionality and features, maybe with less than optimal participation. It's so difficult to get people out. No one is using any of this stuff other than for speculation right now. So building out tools that will be used is important. So hopefully you guys can break through on some concepts of what is an efficient vote, what counts for those that are participating, so we can get the things moved and working. What kind of tools have you guys built so far, and what do you expect to have over the next several months here to where people can start using this stuff?
Yeah, like I mentioned, I recently just did a tutorial. So if you actually want to walk through actually me using the tools we built, you could see that it's a YouTube video and a Steemit post on EOS Stack's Steam account. But essentially, we built a member client, which is, it uses material design in the Kazaa framework, which is VJS, and a couple different APIs. For example, like when you create a profile within the DAC, that's just a transaction set to the blockchain, and we have a scraper that's kind of watching for that, finds it, throws it in MongoDB, and now, and then opens up that data via an API, so you can easily access that and see it in the member client. But other than those little points of centralization, and again, it's something that could be reproduced anywhere. Anyone can run their own, as I demonstrated in the tutorial, anyone can run their own kind of verifier of those profiles. But ultimately, the actual member client itself can be run from anywhere. I can run on localhost. I can eventually run it on my phone or on my tablet, whatever, however you want to run it. And so we have these tools in place now for a nice user interface, integrating with Scatter, to go in and register as a member, read through the Constitution, make sure you agree with what that community is involved in, register as a custodian candidate if you want to actually be involved in the leadership of that community, and then also vote for custodians. And what we're building in the future, the next major piece that is required for this, is the worker proposal system. So right now that's done like with a Google form and a Google spreadsheet. It's all transparent, it's all there and verifiable, but ultimately, obviously, we want this on chain. And through that process, then you can have the community kind of agree on what kind of projects they're going to do together, how those are going to be funded, and those are decisions that the custodians that are elected by the token holders get to do. So I really do. I think this is an exciting thing, an exciting evolution of the space to move towards more, global nonviolent consensus, how we can come to agreement on stuff without the current model, which is, again, centralized. And generally, as we all know, fallbacks on threats of violent force, or it's like, do what we say, use our currency or else. And this is a much more voluntary, open participatory environment. And I think it's one of those things that's so powerful, we don't yet realize how much it's going to fundamentally change human existence and how we interact with each other and how we create, communities that we want to engage with. And it's one of those things that's like, the internet in the early 90s, it's just not there yet. People don't understand, they're expecting Netflix, and it's just like, well, we got to solve the last mile problem, or we got to solve these basic low-level protocol level stuff. So that's the first part, is completing the member client, and that's with membership, the token, voting, and the worker proposal system. And then the next piece is the DAC factory, and what that is essentially taking all of that functionality and make it really easy to deploy. So it'd be a system where you can just kind of say, yeah, here's what I want my token to be called. Here's what I want my parameters to be. Maybe I don't want 12 custodians, but I want like 30 custodians, or maybe I want 5, or maybe I don't want, this number of voting, or these different permission levels for, special solutions or whatever. All that's going to be configurable, and eventually even just down to like adding your logo and styles and stuff to the member client, and being able to quickly change the language strings for that for your own customizations. So those are the tools we're working on. I'm very excited about the progress we've already made, and I think, again, as we see more and more people getting taken advantage of in these systems, they're going to realize, wait, we need to distribute authority in these systems. We can't have single points of failure. We can't have contracts or exchanges or things like that where it's just one dude. It's got to be a group of people that you trust, and those people have to be accountable. And that, I think, tokenized voting is one of the best ways to do that, where people build a reputation, they get voted in, and if they're doing something bad, they get voted out. It's like just like moving your hashing power to a different mining pool. The idea is that we start building all these DACs, and people can just shift over to a different one if they want to participate in a different community.
So right now, the functioning model is based around the block producer. So you guys have been working, kind of eating your own lunch, making sure that you guys are building this out. And you said it was where? It's members.eos.io.
Yep, that's correct. That's our member client where you can kind of interact with the DAC. We also have a pretty active Discord community, and probably just maybe today or certainly this week, we have a bot that will actually talk to the chain. So you can get like the member role, which is something that's validated on chain, will be there in that Discord chat community where people are involved in all kinds of projects and stuff. So we have just kind of taking the blockchain out of the ethereal internet space and bringing it into more actual community engagement, which is like work being done, community discussions, that kind of stuff. Those are the type of things we're working on as well.
Yeah, what's great about that model for Michael was the fact that when launched, it was able to help fund some of the initial work, and people kind of viewed this in a certain. Some people had different views on this, but for me, it was absolutely brilliant. That was one of the smartest ways to be able to do this non-external funding. And so you're really not being accountable to anyone other than the group itself, and really looking forward to seeing the updates you guys make. Thank you for the work that you're putting in. So hopefully I will for sure, got my EOS DAC tokens, and maybe I should start putting them to good use, help you guys get some votes out there. So I'll make a commitment to doing that this week, and kind of reporting back to you next week, letting you know how I found your experience, Luke.
That would be fantastic. I really appreciate that. I mean, we've got an amazing team. I mean, Nod, Pieces and Bits, Dallas, I could go on and on and on, all these incredible, obviously Michael Yates, people that are putting incredible work and design work. I'm just kind of sometimes the face of this because I go out and talk about it, but really they've been doing some great work. And again, if you got these EOS DAC tokens, would love for you to go to members, eos.io, go ahead and vote for custodians, help us to get launched. That'd be great.
Sounds good. Moving on, we're talking about, removing vote decay. We talked about some of the some issues with voting last week, just to kind of keep up the discussions. You've just jumped off there, but hopefully he'll be rejoining us with David. Don't want to cannibalize the call too much. So voting and voting decay. Right now we have just an issue at all with anyone voting. Ultimately where the chain's at, us getting anything kind of pushed through in a worker proposal system kind of looks like a far-fetched idea right now. We're looking kind of for thoughts on voting decay. Now, proxies to me have been starting to come, for me at least, have been coming on strong. There've been a bunch of new proxies that have really been getting involved. They're really starting to at least move the needle on some things. Brock Pierce actually just signed up for his new proxy. He's got a good amount of votes, and he's moving. I just spoke with him in Japan. He's very, very passionate about, very up to date with everything that's going on, and those are the type of people that we need to start reaching out to the community, voting on behalf of, and then getting involved with the issues if we want to have any of the referendums kind of signed, and then us move towards them, which will be something that hopefully we can get something passed within the next couple of months or month. But The idea of removing vote decay for proxies, if the proxy is voting regularly. I'm not sure when this came up, but I think last week we started kind of communicating on it a little bit. Do you have any thoughts on that, for or against?
Yeah, I mean, I started a proxy just kind of on a whim a while back. I got Luke EOS proxy, and I just checked today. It's got like 2.9 million EOS on it, which is just amazing to me. I'm really blown away by that. I'm honored that people trust that I'm going to make good decisions on their behalf. But it's so I do have some skin in the game in a sense that my reputation and what I decide on these things matters. But I had a great conversation with Ash Oro and Freedom Proxy the other day. A week or two ago, I was out in Denver, and they're in support of keeping the vote decay, which I thought was really interesting. I was like, really? So we had a great conversation about that, because I was kind of the opinion that the entire point of a proxy is to make it easier for people who don't want to be fully engaged with the process to still have their votes make a difference, and for them to have to keep exposing their active key or something along those lines in order to continue to refresh that seems a little silly, especially with the current constitution saying you're not allowed to automate that, which adds a little bit of interesting drama, because Nathan James, the Scatter's like, screw the Constitution, we're going to build in a mechanism to automate it, So there's all these, layers to this discussion that I find fascinating. But ultimately, I think Ash had a good argument, and he'd be a great person to have on this conversation as well. He kind of basically said that he doesn't want to create two categories of voters, where the proxies would have some special rights or privileges beyond the individual voter. And I respect that opinion. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. I was kind of like more focused on usability and the user experience and making it as easy as possible for people, because I know that voter apathy is one of the #1 problems you're going to face. We're still at only 25% engagement on voting for BPs. So I'm still going to push that our problem is not, that people are voting and then leaving. The problem is people are not voting. So I'm personally of the opinion currently that it's not a bad idea to remove that decay, because I do want that active number of voters to be as high as possible at this point, because it's really a systemic risk to the system as far as our distribution of governance. But I'm not a strong opinion about it that I haven't voted yes on it, that to actually remove the decay. I think probably a better approach is more so along what Nathan is doing, basically saying, hey, look, if this is a problem, then you can voluntarily do what you want and set up an automation script to consciously say, I want this to be my vote every week. I think that may be a better approach. And I respect Ash's opinion of not creating these two different hierarchies of voters. So to me, maybe a better resolution would be, let's remove that concern about automating something. Like if I have an intention to vote, maybe have a limit on it, maybe 3 months, 6 months, something like that. That's like, okay, yeah, if you automated it and then died or something like that, well, then that's ultimately the problem we're trying to solve, so that the vote is really your intention. But as long as the vote is my intention, it seems a little silly to put restrictions on how I express my intention, right? But it is a concern. I think voter engagement is the bigger concern, and I would like to see focus on that, getting more EOS token holders actually participating in the governance.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the large concern that I have as well. Whether or not somebody ticks an automatic button to disable their vote decay via scatter is something I'm not as concerned with. If they at least logged into scatter, were able to initially go and vote towards a proxy or however they're choosing their vote, I think that's better than what people are doing now. So that'd be great. Josh, do you have any thoughts on the subject?
Yeah, I'm kind of in line with Luke. To me, the issue right now with voting is more about voting for referendum. I mean, in terms of voting for BPs, I don't think that's the only place where it would make a difference, because the referendum system, we took out vote decay. So there is no vote decay there, so it's not going to solve a problem there. I just went up to EOS Authority's site. I'm trying to think, like, there won't be a major change in the top 21 or top 30 if we removed it, and I don't think removing vote decay will draw people out. I don't think anyone's not voting because of that. The fact that Scatter has the automated re-voting shows that there hasn't been this great shift. Hey, we fixed the problem. So I'm just not sure if we're actually solving a problem by doing that. That being said, if you look at something like Steam, the last time I looked, to get to the top 100 witnesses on Steam, you had to grab 120 or 119 accounts, because 19 of them were inactive. So if we're going to create a system, there has to be some sort of block, like a 3 or 6 month period, like Luke said, in my mind.
Yeah, it should be interesting. And speaking of referendum, we spoke about it last week. I mean, getting anything over 3% seems like a hurdle, a hill now. One of the things that we had briefly discussed last week was maybe, again, and these are all, even in the referendum, it's all just going to be really suggested movements forward from the BPs, but getting things to a more reasonable value, and rather than considering 15% before we actually consider anything, the idea that we have to start moving on some of this stuff.
Michael made a good point that like the clarity in the Constitution is about the actual referendum of the Constitution itself. Like actually ratifying the Constitution, it spells out exactly what that particular ratification would look like, which I think is important and is helpful to say, if you're going to have a new Constitution, this impacts every single member of the EOS community, we're going to outline what that looks like. I think what's interesting is people have taken that and interpreted it to mean all referendums. And I'm not necessarily sure that that's the case. I don't think that's clear in that my interpretation of that contractual agreement. And so when I think about it, I like that, for example, EOS Authority kind of said referendums and polls. They kind of admitted that this isn't really a structured kind of like click a button and this code gets deployed type system. That's still in the hands of the block producers. So ultimately, I look at this as a signaling mechanism, and there's even been some argument there was a great video about the Constitution recently where, the idea that ECAF could be a signaling mechanism as opposed to an order giving, where the BPs would just be automaton, just doing whatever they're told. So I think that thinking about referendum as a signaling mechanism, if there's a strong community sentiment to say, hey, we think we're going to do this, I think it's great for BPs to be like, hey guys, okay, here's the actual code to do it. It's now up there. And the block producers are now going to vote based on what we see here. Here's your moment to engage. Either remove the block producer who you think is going to vote in a way you don't want, or go vote for the referendum to set a more clear signal to the BPs. Because ultimately, it's funny how many of the referendums have no actual code change recommendations. So they're not valid. They're not, there's nothing, they're not actionable. So they're just opinion polls, and that's cool. I mean, as a proxy and as a BP involved in a BP, I want to know more about what the token holders think about these issues. I also think it's interesting that sometimes it's a signal to us as educators to recognize that they're sometimes misinformed. You might be passionate about something without understanding it, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, I need to actually get involved and say, hey, you're voting this way, but really, if you knew this, you might vote the exact opposite way.
To totally agree. One of the things that we've been working on or trying to push forward is taking, Josh, that EOS Canada EOS enhancement proposal system. Actually, I'd like to see that repurposed onto the Git itself, the EOS.io Git itself, where we actually have the similar to like the BIP protocol or similar to the YIP protocol. To where we can all be on the same page, and then any referendum actually would have to point back to a PS, and so where we can actually see code implementation and understand that people are actually going to be working on this before pushing it forward.
This week, because when I wrote the EEPS system, I did everything foolishly EOS mainnet centric, and I need to change that to be EOS.io centered. And then figuring out, I reached out to a few people who owned, github.com/EEP, github.com/EEPS. Really? And I want to put it in a new repo for sure.
Really, it should be, we talked about it, it should be under the github.com/EOS.io.
Yeah, so I'm going to reach out to Block One on that. That's part of my my task for this week.
So we discussed that here. Let's like, I'd love to be in, if you need my help in any of those conversations. If we want to go talk to Jem as well, he's aware. The idea that's where I don't care who calls it what or whatever it is, but that's where our proposal system needs to go. We need to get on the idea of more formatted towards academic process, where we hadn't had beforehand. And so, I'm with you on that fight, Josh. I didn't know it was you who had written that. That's something that I was really excited about.
Great, thanks.
Trying to get that into action would be a good idea. So, really quickly moving on. Last week we kind of discussed the concept of, we have this EOS savings account that is just, very well funded at this point. It may to be good or to be bad. The concept of what to do with this, in the fact that right now there's not really a method or a place for this to go. It looks like a big honeypot to a lot of people. We don't necessarily need all of this cash right now. We're not going out and doing anything to change the world ultimately at this moment with that cash or with those tokens. One of the things we had discussed was potentially nulling those tokens on a quarterly or monthly basis, to where we don't have an unreasonable amount of inflationary tokens that are existing just on the system, really being there for people to attack. I think it's something that we thought might be good for the community. So wanted to get some thoughts on that. Notice that David Peckham has joined us. Good morning, David. David, maybe you could start off on some thoughts on next steps for a monthly or quarterly vote on the EOS savings bucket.
So good morning, everybody, by the way, or good afternoon in my case. So I've been looking at the EOS savings proposal system and try to work out what is an actual practical way to manage it, because I think virtually everybody's agreed that this perpetual account just building up higher and higher and higher amounts till it's got to sufficient levels now that it actually would be unhealthy for them to be being even deposited and spent liquid on the market. It's not a good thing, nor was it part of its original intentional design. The only example I gave actually on the call that we had last week with Eve on this was I gave one example of where I could think, for example, conceivably of the sort of thing that EOS savings could be used for, which was that the mainnet community could decide that they wanted to actually take full control over the development of the actual code base. And so they would end up deciding that it was worthwhile hiring a core development team, right? So there is an example there of where EOS savings would actually be drawn upon in a scenario like that. Now, that really fed back into quite a good suggestion. I think Timothy actually may have been the one to propose that, which is that actually really what made most sense therefore is that logically we should actually be having a routine vote on whether or not to actually potentially burn, say, a quarterly amount of the EOS savings, or whether or not to actually be considering proposals in a more structured way. Now, I don't know what the views are of you guys on the call about this, but certainly from my perspective, I think that the community is looking for a degree of leadership on this. It's looking for a degree of structure on this with regards to how any kind of consideration of this sort of thing is put forward. Clearly, as I think you've been touching on here, the referendum system, such as it is more providing a means of polling and engaging of opinions, and clearly is not likely to reach the sort of levels that enable some sort of blind following of actions anyway, and perhaps that's never the intention or should be for BPs of any sort anyway. So if you take a step back and apply the same logic therefore to the savings account, we have choices. There is the maximalist idea, which is to just completely abolish it, and there is another way of looking at it, which is that actually it is quite a convenient means of potentially having a source of revenue for the unknowns for the network needs of the future. We don't fully yet know what the network is going to need in 6 months, in 2 years, and so on and so forth. It may be that it faces some major technological competition from other innovation, and the source for that is going to be some sort of major level technical upgrades that require a much larger technical team. And it may be that block one is not deemed to be fit for purpose for pushing forwards that vision, or the vision of the mainnet community differs fundamentally in some ways. Those are just examples of where, therefore, the block producers themselves could, in theory, effectively carry out their role, which is to enact the will of the token holders and act in the best interests as they deem fit of the community. So this idea of quarterly voting with regards to the contents of the savings account was one that was floated as a way of controlling its unnecessary growth and enabling us to actually assess as a collective and reach consensus on whether or not there is anything deemed to be worth spending those funds on, or if not, whether or not to actually burn them and control the level in that, which would have a benefit in terms of, from the perspective of the wider community, it obviously has an effective anti-inflationary impact. Although it's not liquid supply, it is nonetheless potential circulating supply in the future, and that has a potential benefit there to things like price as well, in theory. So I don't know what you all think to that, but that was at a high level the summary of the conversation we had last week on that.
That's a great summary. Yeah, I've got some thoughts that might be worth discussing. Like with my experience on the Steam blockchain as an example, I've been a consensus witness there for quite some time. And as many know, Steam Incorporated kind of ninja mined 80% of the stake in the beginning. And in the beginning, that was, you know, not so great. A lot of people were frustrated about that. But at the same time, as Dan Lermer did a great post on, it also was not an ICO. So it kind of walked the line between how to raise funds for an organization and not do an ICO. And they, you know, were kind of in charge of building the protocol. And over the years, there's been a lot of frustration pent up about, you know, their management of that funds. They are now in about 20%. So they've been kind of selling. There's been this constant downward pressure. And there is now this issue where they're like, okay, if we want to take core development out of the hands of Steam Incorporated, a centralized organization, and, you know, who just laid off 70% of their people, for example, how are we gonna fund it? And there isn't this pool of money to be able to do that. So I think that's a great example. I look at that as one of the most kind of justifiably legitimate reasons for those funds. But I also think that not having clarity on what the funds are for, it creates uncertainty in the markets. It's not a good plan. It's a ton of money just sitting there. So I think clarity on what it's for and how we're going to use it is important. Letting it just kind of grow and grow and grow indefinitely with no clarity is probably not a great plan. But there's another aspect to this that I got from a discussion with Scott from Greymass, is the idea that the economic model in place, if Steam solves this where the actual people getting in, you know, the new distribution of token through the rewards pool are much higher percentage than the block producers. Whereas on EOS, the new injection of currency is just going to BPs. And he talked about the game theory economics of this and why it's a challenge, in that over time, if they even keep a little bit of their increase and don't spend it all on infrastructure or other projects, for example, if just a little bit, then over time, and he actually did the math on this, calculated it out, it's within a few years even, they will have full control of the network because they will have more EOS tokens than anyone else can have, and because they're getting an increase in tokens. So this is a definite concern, and I think that the economic model of 4% going to worker proposals and 1% going to block producers was good, because it essentially prevents that from happening. Unfortunately, as you said, that money is not liquid, so it's not effectively doing that. It's just sitting there. So one thing that I would like to consider is, as we mentioned earlier on the call, EOS Stack is working on our worker proposal system within our community, and that's all smart contract based. It has the funds actually go directly out of our account into the service provider account. There's also a escrow account involved, so that the block producer, or the custodians, the workers, and the arbitrator essentially, and those are defined on each and every transaction. So there's no base layer. It's just like, hey, I want to do this thing, and here's an expert who's going to verify that I did it correctly. If they disagree, there's a 2 of 3 multi-signature built into the code on that escrow account to make sure the funds go to the right place. If somebody tries to scam the DAC and doesn't do the work, well, then the arbitrator and the custodians can refund the money back. And vice versa, if a new custodian board gets elected and they're like, nah, we don't want to pay for this, we don't like it, the guy can be like, look, you made it a commitment. The arbitrator validated that it's valid, and the money can get transferred correctly. So I'd like to explore a worker proposal system in the microcosm of EOS DAC, get it functioning, get it effective, get it working well, get people excited about it. And maybe someday, you know, we have this DAC chain initiative where we're talking about making those system level contracts. Maybe that's the next evolution of this. So there's a whole chain, a whole side chain on EOS.io, you know, just enabling DACs with the different system level contracts for this stuff. So you don't have to trust EOS DAC, you can trust the entire block producer community. And then from there, maybe that could be ported into a long-term solution into EOS itself on the mainnet, and then those funds could be used. So my thought on this is essentially, I think it does create a lack of clarity, which is a problem, and I think what should be clarified. If that includes burning, then that makes sense as well if needed. But ultimately, you know, those funds might be needed in the future. But if they are needed, I'd like to see a nice structured on-chain mechanism for doing that and doing those distributions in a verified, transparent way. And then also, you know, there's the other part about this, which is kind of, you know, you mentioned kind of a systemic example, a systemic risk example, David. Worst case scenario, let's say you burn $50 million in EOS, and down the road you run into a systemic issue. We're like, holy moly, if we don't have $50 million, we're done. I imagine the community would support a referendum to say, let's create the $50 million through a multi-sig of the BPs. You know, Bitcoin maximalists will freak out and be like, no, you can't mess with the token supply of something. But it's like, this was in the original design, that this money would be available for situations like this. We haven't needed it, so there's no reason for it to kind of just sit there. So maybe if we did a burn, there'd be a possibility to undo that essentially if needed. And this is the flexibility that we get within EOS that we don't have in other chains. This is what prevents the DAO hack, is we can actually modify our contracts as we go along.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Just the thought that this is in some account growing without without any sort of structure around it, just is a little bit dangerous. I think that looking back towards the idea of us getting towards as low of a inflation more or less as possible, the 4% it sounded like a great number. May have been too large. Maybe. At least for now, but being able to I think it's a benefit to the community to not have inflation be a large number to where if we don't need it and if it's not being used, or until we have systems in which it can be used on, to not have it there. So trying to get that up potentially as a thought of something that we can move towards. It would be something that I think would be a good idea, and at least trying to get some thoughts around that. So ideally we'll get a proposal together, and we'll have Stuart and Kadar lead that proposal to try to think about what could be done. And you're right, we will always track and monitor and understand what had been burnt when, to where if there is some sort of major catastrophe, or if we'd like to move immediately off of block one run code base, then it's the possibility is for it to be there. But ultimately, just sitting there, being a part of this market, diluting the value of current tokens, to me does not make so much sense. So we'll try to get a proposal up. Maybe that'll be one of the earlier things that comes from this. David, you missed earlier. Josh was talking about the EEPS. Josh actually wrote the EEPS for EOS Canada. So getting into some conversations, I think he's going to reach out to Block One about that, and maybe we can get Jay Chang and Jem assisting him on that as well.
Yeah, I just reached out to Bart, and so Bart's going to look into it with Block One.
Fantastic, Josh.
Sounds great. I'm really happy about having this as a form of weekly meeting, because I think it's already, for me, been vastly more productive than some of the larger BP type meetings of the past. And I also think it was actually overdue in terms of us trying to work out how we actually break some of the ideological deadlocks that we've found ourselves in as a community. I'm just curious, does anybody have any thoughts on what are the next steps with regards to taking it from these sorts of initial meetings now to something more tangible in terms of a series of steps that we can lead to proposed actions?
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Luke. Go ahead.
Yeah, to me, I forgot who it was. Somebody was wearing a shirt that said, "Show me the blocks," or "It didn't happen." It's like that. I love that perspective where we can talk all day long, but until there's stake-weighted vote behind what we're doing with an actual on-chain proposal, I don't know that it's super meaningful. And so it's like, and we, Dave, we've had these discussions since prior to mainnet launch. There was all kinds of yap, but not a whole lot of action. And so my encouragement would be, again, like we said earlier, leadership to take steps to say, look, people who actually know what they're doing in regards to the code, regards to the changes that have to happen, make a proposal, or at least put it out there. I mean, man. Going back to Steam as an example, there was a person, I guess he used to be a hire from Steemit. I think it was a contractor or something, Steam Incorporated. He did a pull request to fork out Steemit's Incorporated's funds. As an example, just literally just forked the repo, did a pull request on his own repo, just saying, hey, community, wouldn't this be interesting? Holy moly, the amount of drama that caused. It was amazing, but it started all this, all these incredible conversations, and the weeks have gone on since then. Now we have the Steam Alliance and all these other things that are happening. So I think that just one person doing a pull request to suggest a code change can start an incredible number of conversations, and they could move the entire community forward in one direction or the other, or multiple directions. So I think that, to me, it starts with code. It's not so much a code as law thing as much as it's this is fundamentally what we're doing. We're participating in an environment defined by code. And therefore, the first step to me is, here's the actual code changes we're considering. Here's the impact on the economy, on the community, on everything else. And then from there, you can have tangible discussions. It's not so much just about, well, let's get into philosophy and liberty and all these other crazy things where it's like, okay, that's great. But ultimately, what are we going to do? We can have those conversations for 3 months and do nothing. But if it's like 5 pull requests, and now we're actually, okay, let's get concrete on this, right? What's the downside of doing this? We can do pros and cons analysis, all that kind of stuff. And I think to me, that would be the way forward, is getting more people who actually understand the code, actually participating in putting out proposals of actual changes, and then discussing those and say, okay, here's the downside, here's the upside. For example, someone could do a multi-sig to burn, on a quarterly basis or something like that, or even just say, hey, I'm going to burn, January's, inflation on this savings account. That would be an example where we could strike up a conversation, and then VPs get asked, hey, are you gonna agree to that MSig? It's sitting there. Are you gonna approve it? And now people can start talking about their opinion on it, where previously maybe they wouldn't.
Yeah, that'd be an easy one to implement first. And Stuart, if you're on there, let's move that forward to a proposal. Well, let's get that at least on the referendum. Let's get a multi-sig contract up for that burn. I think that's a kind of an easier example that we could start with. David, to your point, I'd love some help getting some more people on just in this conversation. I've noticed over the last couple of weeks now, there's been a good spark. Some people are witnessing this and noticing this. The concept behind this is making sure that people can understand different points of view, that we can inform the voters that may be watching this about the issues, and then ideally really motivate them to go out and vote. Because this really doesn't happen unless we get people out there voting. And really, this is just a concept of, let's have a weekly conversation to make sure that people know that there are people working on the system, and that there is educated thought in going behind what it is that we're trying to do. So it's being done in an open manner. So I want to make sure, I try with as much time in my day to include as many people as possible, but having this be a staple, a weekly meeting, non-mandatory, the no participation necessary, but knowing that it is here where people can come in and have conversations about things, and people can get credit for certain things that they've done, and also people can maybe take some blame for some thoughts if things aren't going the right way. But ultimately, that's what this is trying to do, and hopefully we can kind of all build this together. So, that being said, we are running up kind of at the end of the normal. We'd like to keep these things in about 30 minutes or so. We'll get this posted, and we'll get some more people on this and viewing. As an action item, we'll get a multi-sig referendum thoughts behind the burn. So I'll put that up, and ideally, when I do that this week, I'll do that with KDR, to potentially have some support from Luke, Josh, David. Your organizations will kind of maybe look at signing that together and pushing that up if it looks right to you guys.
Or at least, this I think will be a catalyst for the conversation to be like, hey, this brings up a worker proposal system that we might all want but didn't have. Like that was something kind of pseudo promised from block one and never delivered. So I feel like maybe I don't want to put Band-Aids on problems, but actually solve problems. So maybe the real thing is, let's actually just like we got the referendum system out there, which wasn't there at launch time, but we needed. This might be that next step. So okay, the answer to this might be build the worker proposal system, and that might be cool. And maybe burn until then, who knows, but these are the kind of things that it gets the conversation going once we actually have, oh, you're going to do X? Well, I don't want X because I really want Y. It's like, okay, cool. And now I'll go build Y. And then all of a sudden, X is not a concern, right? Yeah,
you know what? We've got the great basis of WPS. Jay Cheng had already, had been working on that. And, I personally would love to see that get implemented. That's what we need. We need the outside participation takes financial motivation. And it needs to be seen that in this community, if you decide to build or you want to build, that you can be rewarded for that. So ultimately, that's where I'd like to see it being done. And maybe you're right. Maybe people seeing that, these tokens are going to go away until we get some movement forward. Maybe that's the kick that everybody needed to start moving forward. But I appreciate everybody being on this morning, and thank you guys all for joining. Next week, same time, same place. And look forward to seeing you guys then.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having us. See ya.
Thank you.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks, David. Thanks, Josh. See you guys in a bit.